Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah from Code for Africa, and I want to welcome all of you to Code for All's 2023 Summit. This year holds a special place in the civic tech community's heart as Code for All commemorates its 10th anniversary, culminating in its 4th annual online summit. Whether you're a familiar face or a first-time participant, you should know that the 2023 Summit is more than just an event. It's a global convergence that the Code for All's core team, along with their 31 member organizations, curates each year to foster unity within the global civic tech community. To celebrate their 10th anniversary, the network is kicking off a crowdfunding campaign and turning to their amazing community with a heartfelt ask. Throughout the duration of the summit, you'll have the chance to chip in an amount that feels just right for you. Your support is absolutely crucial in keeping the unity and empowerment of both the Code for All network and the Code for All Summit alive. In the screen in the chat, we will share the link where you can directly contribute to amplifying Code for All's mission and propelling their efforts in the years to come. Now, a few housekeeping items before we get started. During the session today, we'll start by hearing from each of our speakers. Following this, we will have a group discussion, and then the room will open up for Q&A from the audience at the end. If you'd like to ask any questions during this webinar, please type them into the chat window on YouTube live streaming. We'll try to address them during the conversation. A recorded version of this webinar will be available at codeforall.org and on our YouTube channel for future watching. Great. Now let's get into it. The session you've joined today is called Does Open Source Really Work, or Is It Just Hype? And it's all about explaining what it takes to localize tools and assess the true replicability of open source software across civic tech. Our speakers today are Ali Raza, Director of Technology at Code for Pakistan, and describes himself as a quintessential civic hacker who loves solving civic tech problems with simple solutions. Olivia Vereha, versatile professional with a background in journalism and a passion for using technology to address social issues. She transitioned from journalism to becoming a skilled UX designer, leveraging her research and documentation expertise to tackle societal challenges through technology. Having served as a consultant for startups and tech companies, Olivia joined Code for Romania as a core team member, where she now leads the organization's research and design program. Currently, she serves as Vice President of Product at Comet Global. Finally, Xavier Franklin, Code for Africa Senior System/Site Reliability Engineer. He holds a bachelor's degree in telecommunications and information engineering from Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology in Kenya, and is a certified AWS cloud practitioner. He will be joining us shortly. Thanks so much for being with us today. I'll take it from here. So now we'll hear from each of our speakers, starting with Ali. So Ali, my question for you is, what is open source and why has it gained so much attention in recent years?
So thank you so much, Sarah, for that question. Open source, it means that, the source code, the building block, the DNA is publicly available. This allows anyone to review it, modify it, distribute it. The reason, and I feel like there's like a lot of catalysts in this industry that have resulted in its popularity, because it provides transparency, lower costs. It accelerates innovation because there are no barriers. The community itself is helping build it, test it. I mean, there is some negative press around it. We might get that to a little later in the panel, but really, the reason I think it has taken off in the recent years is because of giants like Linux or Kubernetes. They did an experiment and they took a shot in the dark, and it worked out very well for them. the community supported it, and look at how big those things are right now. They're giants. Enterprises are using them in their infrastructure, giving them due credit. If those projects were not open source, they would have not, had this massive impact. So I believe that, working in the open, building in the open, it has its own benefits, and I've seen it myself in over the year, over my 12 years of experience. I've seen it that when you build it out in the open and you invite the community to take part in it, you will see that not only people start taking interest, not only you get free press, but you also get a lot of support from a lot of experts who would otherwise charge insane amounts of money to do something for a project that hasn't declared itself open source.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Ali. I think in your description of what it is, you presented a very great case study on the successes of open source, such as Linux. So I want to kind of pivot to you, Olivia, if you have any further examples of innovative solutions that have emerged from the open source community.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much. There's a ton of examples because obviously the most visible of them are with the Linux and Kubernetes and different other tools that we see all over the place and that have also a very strong power of communications behind it. But looking into the technology for social goods sector, where I've been in the past 8 years, and I think this is the closest to me, and I can give most examples, we can see tools that have emerged and managed to successfully replicate because they're open source all over the world. I think we have examples such as Console project from the Console Foundation. We have several examples of the tools built by my society. We have in Code for Romania, which is my home organization, that has built tools that are now redeployed in Poland, redeployed in Togo, and other places around the world. So we see a lot of these examples that could not have been possible if it wasn't a community of developers and practitioners that develop these tools in order for them to actually be reused and scaled. And you were touching, Ali, on innovation from this perspective, and I think that using open source in your day-to-day products is actually the key to managing to find new perspectives and new ways of solving issues. Because you don't start from scratch, you start from a ton of expertise that's put in this code and in all the repositories we can find all over the place on GitHub or other places, and it gives us power to not go from 0 to 100 every single time we're trying to fix something. So the importance of the community is absolutely crucial, and I think open source finally is starting to get the good press that Ali was mentioning also, and it's starting to pick up as a viable way of doing things, and it's not just perceived anymore as these bunch of people who really want to produce open technology for everybody to access. I think we're at a point where technology has reached a level where open source is bringing transparency, is bringing more trust than the big closed kind of closed source systems tend to not be able to meet it anymore.
Awesome. So you were giving great examples and success stories of open source projects and the redeployment globally. And something that you touched on that I would like to explore more, perhaps Ali, you could piggyback off of it, is kind of what then motivates individuals to contribute to open source projects, and perhaps even more than individuals, organizations. So, yeah.
Right. So I think one of the key pieces that Olivia also touched upon was, see how open source democratizes the whole, the chain. Technology is no longer in one person's hand. It's no longer, one person or organization controlling it. You have now, your own part to play because it's open. There are great examples, especially in the civic tech space, that we have worked ourselves with. Like Ushahidi is one of the best ones. Open 311 is another one. My Society is awesome. Like they work for you, fix that. Like those things, like if they were not open source, I feel like individuals would not care, honestly. Like you build something, you build it great UX, everything's awesome. It's not, I'm sorry, we cannot show you what the code is. Even if we are selling your data, we can't tell you that it's there, but people do not find the motivation. But once you open it up and you foster a healthy community, because now there's a long-term viability. Let's say the core contributor has taken over a new job and they no longer want to work. They do not have the time to work, but because the project gained so much clout, like I've never felt that there will come a time that Ushahidi will no longer be supported. Recently, I saw there's a very famous JavaScript library. It's open source. It's called Lodash, and a lot of developers use it. Uh, Lodash has no more open issues right now. All of the issues, all of the things that it had on all the tasks that were supposed to be done, the community has taken care of that. So read a funny tweet that Lodash is bankrupt in terms of issues right now. So how did that magic happen? It's not a company. It's not a conglomerate. There is no organization behind it. The community itself, the individuals, this themselves took upon themselves that, yeah, let's go fix it. We are using it. Now, in terms of organizations, it changes a little bit. Because I've always felt like that the major factor where organizations start taking ownership and they are motivated towards keeping things open source, there's a huge impact of the cost. Because if you're running an organization, you have to hire talent, you have to hire people to maintain something. It's crazy money. Technical resources are expensive. Everybody knows it all across the world. But if your core product is open source, community is maintaining it for you, you're making money through let's say a non-for-profit means, or just taking the service charge for it, or just charging the money to get it set up for someone. For example, case of Ushahidi, so that is the motivation usually that we see around organizations that are doing open source. Obviously the impact is there, the good graces is there. Olivia, I feel like you have something to add, and I want you to
No,
please go ahead.
I was just waiting for you to. All of the points that you've just made are perfectly valid, and I think there's also a different layer of motivation as well, and it has to do with sustainability.
Yes.
In the past 8 years, I think we've had over 10 cases of different smaller organization or initiative groups that have developed tools, and that they came in and said, look, we're shifting our priorities. Can you adopt this tool and maintain it further? Because we already have different NGOs depending on these tools, or different beneficiaries. Yeah. And we were able to just take it in and continue to provide a service that was vital, and allowing an organization to develop and pivot to something else. So in terms of sustainability, we always talk about how it's really hard to do maintenance, and it's very costly. It's huge. The costs are absolutely immense when it comes to maintaining open source, or any kind of technology for that matter. But the fact that you always have the option to team up with another organization or another party, saying, this is, people depend on this tool, you need to move it further. Or you can look at situations such as the crisis we're facing all around the world. Yeah. If we have an excellent tool that's been built in Romania or in Mexico or wherever, if tomorrow there's an earthquake somewhere else, let's just redeploy it. Even if, let's say, Cuidando Mexico, for instance, have worked a lot on disaster relief. Even if they don't have the capacity to scale it to a different country, there's a closer organization to Turkey that could redeploy and replicate that. So the benefits are endless, and they especially manifest around public service and services for the most vulnerable, more than in the technology space itself. Sorry, I don't want to take more of the time, please.
No, that's totally valid. In fact, it kind of builds into the next question that I wish kind of Xavier was here to address, which is like, to break apart, the different kinds of individuals and organizations that use open source. So, you were talking, and also not the ones that just like use it, but also the ones that deploy it, right? So you've touched on, vulnerable situations in societies. You've touched on, tech for good organizations who are the ones that create it. Are there any other like users and or developers who participate in creating or using open source software, and like what are the differences for these various users? Perhaps Olivia, sorry, just to come back to you, but I know you have a background in like UX, so I would love to hear from your technical perspective on this.
So from a technical perspective, there are different groups of users that are super relevant when it comes to scaling and enabling open source use around different areas. So first of all, what we have the civic tech community, which is the Code for All network and all the other satellite organizations that are around the world. Then you have all the companies that started developing open source. We're looking also at vendors that provide tools for other major organizations, such as, I don't know, the case of Rapid Pro being developed and deployed by UNICEF, even though there are different for-profit vendors around the type of tool. And we've seen a huge increase in the European Union in adopting and promoting the share and reuse principle, and also providing licenses for governments all across the union to be able to replicate among public administration. So we see a lot of interest going into open source from the perspective of people who provide services through open source tools. Second, you have the end users, and you're going to see a lot of communities putting a bit of pressure in specific countries into opening up the public code. We have the Netherlands, who's a wonderful example with the Foundation for Public Code, and the government that is pushing for, if it's public money, the code should be public. Or in other places, such as different communities that, because they understand they have little resources in the nonprofit sector, you see organizations sharing their tools with the help of other civic tech organizations or even private actors, saying, hey, I've built this wonderful thing for social services, I want to open it up for everybody. Or even coalitions of, let's say, umbrella organizations saying, I'm building something open source so I can give it to my 1,000, 2,000 members. So we see very varied motivations in using and providing open source tools, as well as, and also looking at the entire conversation around big tech and the data and the privacy. This whole trust topic that comes around open source is also building up, because a lot of the people started to sort of look at the big players with more skepticism, not because necessarily they know something bad must come out of there, but because they are more wary of the fact that they need to understand what's happening with their data, and they need to figure out if there's any chance that, especially in oppressive regimes, if the technology that is provided by for-profit actors is going to be used against them. So we're in a very shifting environment at this point in time, and I think open source is one of the key concepts and one of the key strategies of moving forward in terms of technology, even if we're not talking about full open source and licensing for everybody to use and reuse as they want, but at least we're going to start talking about at least sharing among networks and sharing this concept of public code and owning the code and ownership of the code by entities that can be held accountable for it. Over to you, Ali. I'm sure there's a ton of perspective coming in from your experience.
So yeah, I do agree. I mean, in our experience, we have seen this. For example, redeploying things in terms. So you might know that Pakistan had a flood very recently, and it was devastating. Infrastructure was destroyed. A lot of people displaced. So we on in a very quick turnaround, we redeployed Ushahidi and started crowdsourcing data as much as possible for organizations that were working on the ground and providing aid to these people. So that is like, if there was no Ushahidi, or if there was no platform out there that would allow something like that to spin up very quickly and just get going and not get into the details of UX or development or sprint planning. I mean, that's you don't have the time for that. So so this does play a very pivotal role, and I do agree. A lot of governments around the world are looking at open source. You have great examples like UK Gov. You have Estonia building their whole infrastructure on the blockchain in the open. You have Singapore.gov. We have also developed some case studies on building platforms that governments can utilize, and not just build an app for everything. Just build actually an ecosystem where citizens can contribute. If there's an API out there, the citizens can come in and build a service on top of it. So the really what people should be doing, and how the tech democracy works in this way is by opening things that usually because like that's a great point, Olivia. It's public money. the code should be public. Like I'm paying for the app you're developing that lets me renew my driver's license. Why do I not know like what's in there? I should know that. Some countries like ours are, because there are some myths surrounding open source, which people, I don't know why people keep bringing those up. Like, it's not secure, it's not stable just because it's open source. I mean, then why are big companies like Microsoft, AWS, and Google playing in the open source space? Everything is open. Like, why are they doing it if it's not secure? Like, they're supporting these open source projects. So many examples. TensorFlow, completely open source, out for the people to build on. AWS has its own libraries. Facebook has so much open source code on GitHub right now. It's insane. People are using that. Why are these big organizations then, and these other governments are looking at open source? It's yeah. So I don't know why those myths are not dead yet, but I think it's high time now that this, in the next few years, we will see that we won't have any more people talking about open source like that. It does have an impact. It does have a use.
Yeah. Now to kind of like pivot the conversation. Thanks for your contributions on the uses and users of open source. But let's like kind of pivot now to like the challenges of open source projects. So what are the common challenges that these projects face? And then from there, you list some with open source.
Okay, you've interrupted a bit, but I hope I caught on the
Yeah.
question regarding with the challenges. If that's okay, I'll start with just a few and then
Go ahead.
pivot back to Ali. There's obviously a ton of challenges, especially when you're an organization working in the civic tech space. So I can bring in the perspective of the nonprofit open source. So looking at it, there is a matter of sustainability, and this is something that I think every civic tech organization has just realized when they started going into the field, that if you build something that's going to be critical and vital, and a lot of other NGOs are going to use it, or maybe the government or specific groups of vulnerable populations, you don't have the option of shutting that down. Or you're going to do it when there's absolutely no other solution for it. We've created this problem for ourselves in Code for Romania. We currently have 51 live solutions up and running at every moment. It's insane. And it's insane when you think you have 50 different tools doing stuff in education and environment and so on. So funding is definitely critical. And obviously, we're still not at a point, especially in different countries. We're not talking here about the States or other places where understanding what kind of funding needs to go into technology is quite day-to-day business. We're talking about kind of areas where you don't see massive funding going into technology yet. So trying to guide your funders to give you multi-year support, and understanding that maintenance is boring and annoying and whatever, but it needs to be done because people depend on those tools, is quite the challenge. The second challenge for us, it was to find the right mechanism, and I think we've managed to do it successfully. We've tried a ton of ways in which we keep the community engaged. Sure, you have a core team and you have some funding to run your organization, but when you're talking about 50 solutions, you definitely need a volunteer community. And having a volunteer community doesn't mean that you just open up your repositories and pray that somebody's going to come in and fix your issues. You need to do communications, you need to have documentation, you need to merge that code, you need to do code review, you need to do the design needs to be set in place, you need dev notes, you need a ton of work so that somebody can come in and build a button. And it's a ton of work that is not seen, but that needs to be done in order to have a successful project. Second, building this trust. The fact that in 8 years we've managed to shut down just 2 projects, and because the need was no longer on the ground, not because the projects didn't failed or anything, is a proof that whatever we're building is definitely meeting its beneficiaries on the ground. So this is what kept the community going and saying, if I'm coming here and I'm building one module or one form, it's definitely going to be part of a solution that's going to work. And I don't have to worry about the fact that I don't have enough time to contribute more than a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So this is again a challenge in keeping that community tight together and making sure that you have the mechanisms. If your 10 most active contributors tomorrow uh, have different life events and they need to go, you have how to maintain and support that thing, because otherwise it's just going to become completely burdensome. Last but not least, one last challenge I want to talk about is um, also ensuring the satellite things you need to ensure in order to technology to work. You need communications, you need security, you need experts in data privacy, you need a ton of accessibility experts that come in and do auditing. So there's a lot of stuff around building the technology and maintaining it that needs to go at this and develop at the same pace. Obviously, project managers that keep in touch with your stakeholders, with your partners, and so on. So you are uh, you are basically a whole entity doing a ton of stuff that revolves around the technology you build, and making sure that you balance all of these things is quite a challenge, especially because most of the people coming in and building a civic tech organization are people who are driven by a specific motivation. They want to fix something, they want to solve something. Most of them are not communicators, they're not business administrators, they're not accountants, and suddenly they need to handle all of this just to ensure they live from one year to another. So it's a lot to on open source producers' plate, and I think that we need more sustainable mechanisms for these organizations to become sustainable in the long run. Sorry, over to Ali.
So yeah, thank you. So it's funny how we are far away from each other in the world, but our problems are almost similar everywhere. I've seen the same challenges, and they pretty much overlap with what Olivia just said. So biggest thing being funding and sustainability. You have something that's open source, and there's no revenue stream. It becomes unmaintainable because you need something, you need some way. So it's always good to, when you're doing something, you're building it in the earliest time possible. Go for a subscription model, or go for a grant, go for a sponsorship. It's essential. It is going to help you in the long run. We've seen it. We have seen projects die just because we weren't able to maintain them financially, because there is a cost. Even no matter what you do, there will always be, there are ways you can find folks, and it's all sponsorship. Somebody will come and say, hey, I'm going to give you the infrastructure, don't worry, it's free. I'll give you enough funding. I'll give you one of the developers from my company. They'll help you maintain it. But it's important that you reach out, as an organization, as an individual. If you're doing something like that, we've learned that, and we do that from time to time. Like, we try to partner with organizations and people who we know are in the position to help. Another problem that I've seen a lot, is burnout. And it seems kind of not possible in the when you think about it. You say, oh no, that's not possible, it's an open source project. How can people burn out? No, contributors are going to burn out. Most of them have a full-time job, they're doing this out of passion. There will come a time, I've seen it, I've seen people burn out and go and spend a few months in the mountains to clear their head, because they were trying to maintain something, and the workload was just too much for one single individual, that they weren't able to work on it anymore. So it's very important that you build a community around it, and it is a strong contributor community, so that the workload can be shared. It should never just be one or two individuals that you're just like Olivia just said, you just open source the repo and you're praying that somebody comes in and your prayers are answered. Somebody did come in, swooped in, and they started building, but they're going to, sooner or later, they're going to realize, yeah, I can't do this anymore, my other job is too demanding. Another issue that I've seen is again, it seems surreal, but you do accumulate technical debt when you're building something open source, and that is a result of not documenting your code properly. Even though code is, most of it is self-documenting, but not making it accessible in a way that anybody can just come in and we work on the, improving it, the quality or the documentation. So technical debt is real, and that's a challenge for open source projects. You will have so many examples. I have seen it in Code for Pakistan's repos that sometimes just projects accumulate technical debt, and people just give up on them, that it's impossible to fix this is already broken. I'd rather just start a new repo and rebuild this in some new framework that's new and fancy. Now this one is this another point I have, and I've seen it not in Code for Pakistan per se, but I've seen it in other organizations, is that you need community governance. It should never be one person or one organization. If it's open source, it should not be one person's, that it's not a democracy. It's I whatever I say goes. It can't be like that. You need the community to decide. You need a model where people are part of the decision-making process. They can vote on issues. They can, you can do regular monthly, weekly meetups. And I don't want to name some frameworks, but that has happened. The reason they are right now in everybody's bad books is because there was a single person, or a few individuals who were in they were wholly solely making the decisions for the community, which did not sit well. So what did people do? They just stopped working and they stopped contributing, and they started their own thing. So you don't want to go there. And one last thing that Olivia mentioned, like I said, in when I was talking earlier, is security. That's the myth, and that's why. I mean, it is real. It's just you have to make sure that what you're building is secure. But now that you have a community, now that you are building it in the open, the good thing is that you can have people do regular audits. You can build that trust amongst people that this is secure. There is no hidden back channel, backdoor here. This is all open, but it doesn't mean that we are stealing your data. So the security part has to be solved. And it's not like that just because it's open source, it's automatically secure. And because you're not doing audits, you're not inviting the community to pen test it. That is why these myths are, taking shape in people's heads, and especially in people in the governments and these other organizations, that it's not secure. So to just bring it to a close, don't underestimate the value of good documentation. Make sure that your project is very well documented. Like there is no such thing as oversharing or over communication. Just document the heck out of it. You will thank me later, always. So then do not ignore the community. I've seen people, they become obsessed with a project and they do not listen to what the community is saying. You end up burning your bridge. You end up people walking away from you. So these two things, I think, if they're done right, most of these challenges can be avoided. Yeah,
Ali, you've even moved on to the next topic, so which was addressing solutions to these common obstacles that open source projects face. And just to reiterate, those obstacles are building and maintenance, burnout, technical debt, and then security. But some of the solutions to that you've listed are, having a strong contributor community, having community governance,
right,
and solutions towards, sustainability. I know on the Code for Africa side, I this week in Africa, it's the African Internet Governance Forum, and funny enough, the same question about open source replicability came up during one of the sessions. And I think in our side, it was a lot of focus on challenges in the building stage, where it was, okay, so if you're assessing the global north versus the global south, I think it's 2% of the open source projects are in the global south, which means that, or, they originate in the global south, but perhaps the funding is from the global north. So the building is being directed by the global north and not necessarily for the users of the solution, of the platform. So then to sustain what is being built becomes an extra challenge, because is the tool being adopted? What other success metrics are being measured by this kind of global collaboration in building these tools, where the funding and a lot of the guidance is from outside the community. So I think, you know, both you and Olivia hit on the importance of the communities, both like the builders and then also like the users, and how to like govern those processes. So yeah. Any more comments on this before I move on to like the question about like success metrics?
I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good. We can speak about the challenges and ways of working around them for hours.
Yeah.
Do we have another summit?
Yeah.
Yes.
A
Yeah.
whole summit around just the challenges. I
Yes.
work for that.
Cool. So yeah, let's now move back to the successes. So what are the metrics of success for open source projects? Yeah, how do we measure this just beyond perhaps adoption rates? Is there a way to assess impact or effectiveness?
Well, it depends. I think if we're looking at, obviously, if you're producing open source that has a for-profit target, you have your KPIs, you have usage, you have revenue, and so on. We're not going into this, but if we're looking into open source built to address social issues or to address democracy, transparency issues, and so on. So the open source built in the tech for good space. I think you need to always look at the metrics in context. And I think this was one of the mistakes that I've seen being perpetuated, especially in the funding area, because in every reporting document you've seen as an organization towards your funder, you have that wonderful field that says, how many beneficiaries did you assist with your tool? And sometimes it's not about the beneficiaries. Sometimes you enable a tool that if it has 500 people using it, it's probably 500 out of 600. So your adoption rate is actually through the roof and you've managed to solve an issue or another one. So always looking into these, each project has its own indicators, and that should be something that gets explained over and over again, that you can't compare a tool that you did for monitoring elections with a tool that you do for mass population information. Very different things. Second, another metric that you would have is the option to how many times has it been reused or replicated. And again, this also needs to be taken with a grain of salt, because if you have a tool such as the Consul Foundation that built they have the tool that also does participatory budgeting and public consultation. You have public consultation happening all over the world, and with just a bit of customization, you can adapt it to local legislation. It's a tool with very high levels of replicability, also participatory budgeting the same. If you look at a tool such as election monitoring, you have a limited number of replication instances that you can do, because it is only allowed in this number of countries. So you can reach the maximum of redeployment quite easily during the life cycle of a project. In terms of success, you also need to look at longevity. So even if it's used just once in one context, the fact that a project manages to pass, even if its community changes or owner organization, so to say, changes, that product has managed to go because it manages to solve the right problem in the right way that problem needs to be solved. So longevity is one. If taking into account, obviously, that problem still exists, because you might have a situation when it just dissipates because the law changes, or because a specific situation just gets to a point, a conflict ends, and you need, for example, integration tools for migrants in a specific country, but not at the same level of usage as it did when the conflict was ongoing. So you have some metrics that might be universally valid, but they also always need to be put in that specific context. And I think this also, coming back to what you were saying, Sarah, about having the global north understand the situation from the global south, and not designing KPIs and indicators from an ivory tower and assuming they understand the situation on the ground. And this has been always a challenge for smaller civic tech organizations that came in and said, whatever you're expecting of this project is not realistic in the context that we're having. A project that reaches success and produces impact, like visible impact, in 3 months in the Czech Republic is going to produce the same results in 4 years somewhere in South Sudan, right, Ethiopia. So I think we need we also need a lot more talk and advocacy and explanation around how these open source tools manifest in different contexts around the world, directly from the people who are implementing and using them on the ground, rather than nice, beautiful case studies presented from time to time in different contexts. Because we also, just one last point regarding this, we've seen, I think this is a good example of this sort of cleavage between what we expect and what actually happens on the ground. We see a lot of talk going around localization and how to adapt tools so it fits different contexts on the ground. And for a lot of the donors or the supporters, localization a lot of times means translation and a few design tweaks here and there. And while they localize the user interface, they don't also localize the indicators and expectations and deployment on the ground and who you're deploying it with and who you're working with in that specific context. And I think this is, again, a very important thing in understanding how do you embed local contribution and local know-how in designing an intervention with an already existing open source tool. We do a lot of this in trying to explain that whatever tool I have, even if technically 99% of the tool will work the same in Romania as with Morocco, however, the way I'm deploying that tool and making it known and ensuring adoption and all the other things around the technicalities of the solution are localized and need to be put in context in order for the solution to be effective. Over to you, Ali.
So similar thoughts. So what I think is important to it, because it's like Olivia just said, it's not just about the adoption rates. Like a set number of people are using it and it means it's successful. It just might be that the audience is very small, or targets a very niche group of folks. I think there are a few things to take into account. So when you're doing an open source project, you look at, I think the first thing you need to look at is community engagement, because just building on top of what I just said earlier, the earliest you can start making noise and tell people what you're trying to do, that is going to be a very important factor later in the project's life cycle. How many number of active contributors do you have? What's the frequency of contribution? Are people actively discussing issues? Are they because that will tell you about any open source project's health. That there's an active community, folks are talking, not just developers, not just UX or designers or technical people, just people who are actual users, and they're reporting bugs and issues that they have seen while they're using. So that tells you that there is an engaged community that wants to see this project become successful. The other one that I think is important is a bit technical, but it matters too, is how it is the code quality. And the way you look at it is through how many number of pull requests have been merged, how much people are, because people are involved now, there are issues that are being reported, and is somebody working on those issues, are people discussing those issues, and if there are contributions from the community, then how many of those are actually making their way into the code. That builds a healthy ecosystem for your open source project, and it also tells you about the project's technical quality. Then fancy case studies, yes, everybody does them. Olivia is absolutely right, but there has to be a way to show that real world impact of that project. Like, what is changing? You build something that is being used. Let's say we built something in Pakistan and it got deployed in Sri Lanka, or in South Sudan. Is that project bringing real world impact? That's the case study. The testimonials, those are important. It's important to look at those. What are you hearing through the grapevine? So that's important. And it's not just for open source. This is a very proven return of investment, because you've put in the time, you've built something. If you're not looking at the case studies, it will never tell you like was the project a success or not. Then another one, again, it doesn't really seem like much, but the longevity of your project. How often how well it is being maintained. It's been 10 years that this thing has been the community has been shaping it. People are working on it, but if you see a project that has no activity, like that's a deciding factor for most of the people when they are trying to find an open source solution for something that they're trying to achieve. The first thing they go look at is, when was the last time this thing was updated? I mean, there can only be two outcomes. Either this thing is perfect, it doesn't need any more maintenance, there have been no commits to it or any new releases since 10 years. Awesome. I don't know how they did it, but amazing. Let's go use it. Or it's not going to work. You're going to pick it up and it's going to crash the first time you try to run it. So that can tell you a decline in a project's quality if there's no maintenance going on. And then this one's very important, because from what we did on Floodlight, the impact for trying to see how can we use crowdsourced data to help people out there, and that was a real use case. How do you build on top of it? Because it's not just about building a software or a open source project. You have to build an ecosystem on top of it. You have to build it when you see that there's potential there. People are coming up with different things. Are they taking part and using your data to build something on their own? That's how you kickstart an ecosystem there. So if a project has kickstarted an ecosystem out there, people are building plugins, they're building additional tools on top of your stack, and we see these examples everywhere. That is a very strong indicator that this open source project is working and it's a success. I think that's pretty much what I have to offer.
Yeah, no, it's very valid insights, especially like from the technical side, on the pull requests. Yeah, thank you. I guess that kind of brings us to the end of the session. Perhaps to conclude, I'm just going to pose the question or the title of this panel, which is, in your opinion, in a minute or 30 seconds, does open source really work? Or is it just hype? So maybe first you, Ali, and then over to Olivia.
Open source works. I don't think it's just hype. Otherwise, I mean, we have done so many things. I think open source is one of the best ways that you can promote excellence and innovation, and building bridges. Normally, you will not be able to build. Like, we live so far from each other. I think open source is the best way all of us can collaborate on things, and we've done that. We have worked with Code for Africa, we've worked with Code for Mexico, and that's how we've done it. We've built participatory frameworks, totally separate from each other, like divided through borders, but working on something together. So the way open source fosters collaboration, I don't think there's any other technical platform that does it. So it does work. And one thing to note here is that its effectiveness, again, it's not a hype, but its effectiveness really depends on what's the value you're delivering. Is it just a fancy looking website? It was built open source. Maybe it does not have a lot of impact, but if it's a really tool, you put your heart and soul into it, the way you've built it, and there is a community that's getting a benefit from what you've built, then I mean, that's a success. That's testament to the fact that the open source is real. And coming back to the same point, if it was all hype, these big organizations would never go for it. Governments across the world would never go for it. If it was just a buzzword, it's clearly not. So yeah, it works and it's not hype.
Yeah, it's I'm on the same page with Ali here. It obviously works, and we've seen it work. And I think the effectiveness part is one of the most important aspects of the open source side. And I'm just going to leave you maybe with an example as an afterthought. When the war in Ukraine started, we've designed we picked a tool that we already developed, working and doing a totally different thing, and we've redeployed it to be able to do a sort of impromptu case management for patients coming in with HIV from Ukraine and transitioning to the European Union. It took us just a few days to scale that for cancer patients, for people with multiple sclerosis, exactly redeploying the same system and working with different hospitals or different types of medical professionals in different industries. We wouldn't have been able to do that without having an open source tool that can then be scaled and changed and modified in order to serve different purposes. So I think this shows, and also again, when we had everything, the ecosystem built for Ukraine, and then the earthquake in Turkey hit. And we've been able to do a dry run for ourselves. We didn't manage to do a proper intervention in Turkey due to various different reasons. But for us, we did a dry run on how fast can we put together an open source ecosystem similar to what we did for the Ukrainian refugees, but customized for what a disaster looks like in terms of an earthquake. And it took us 8 hours. You can't do that with proprietary software. There's no way you can do
No
that
way.
type of intervention, and there's no way a
Absolutely.
government can move fast enough to do a public acquisition of proprietary software in such little time. So it does work. It works especially when you need it the most, and it works especially in capacitating people who will never be able to afford proprietary software, and that's basically 90% of civil society around the
Yeah.
world.
Absolutely.
So definitely a big yes for all the reasons and many, many more that we don't have time for right now. But looking forward to seeing open source just develop into a massive, massive option for pretty much any actor out there.
Right.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you everyone for being here today for the summit session. A few things I want to tell you about before we all sign off. Civic tech is the bridge that connects technologists, designers, and social activists with governments in order to improve communities. For the past 10 years, Code for All has become the bridge that connects civic tech actors around the world so they can each make a bigger impact in their regions. Your contribution fueled a platform that's all about leveraging strengths, celebrating diversity, and fostering collaboration for the greater good of civic tech. Your support isn't just a donation, it's a statement. It says you're a key player in this global movement. You're ready to dive in, share, and make a real impact. Donate now. https codeforall.org/donate. My colleague will be sharing a few links in the chat. Links for your interest. You'll be able to find a recording of this panel on our YouTube channel. If you like what you saw today and are interested in joining the Code for All community, you can join the Slack space here. Finally, to receive updates about what the global civic tech community is up to, you can subscribe to the mailing list here. Yes. So you'll find these links in the YouTube chat and in the description of the live stream video. Thank you so much, Ali. Thank you so much, Olivia. We'll see you around. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.